If just start actually worked, you wouldn't be still procrastinating. Alex Hormozi says starting is the hack, and he's right. But most of us, we're trying to use willpower to solve a biological problem, and biology almost always wins. And if you don't understand the mechanisms, you'll keep forcing yourself and blaming yourself when it doesn't stick. So let me show you how to stop fighting your brain's biology and make starting automatic.
And so that makes beginning the single greatest hack that you can have.
I agree with him very much. Starting changes things. But here's what most people miss. Starting doesn't work because it magically gives you motivation. It works because action changes your emotional state. And there's a really interesting line of research on goal-directed actions, including a paper by Wang and Milyavskaya from 2019, showing that when people engage in any goal-directed action, their depression and anxiety scores decrease almost immediately and their sense of well-being increases. Not after they're done or finished, but when they start. And that's important because we tend to think, I need to feel ready and then I'll act. But the data suggests quite the opposite. Goal-directed action regulates your mood, but waiting amplifies rumination. So spending an hour or two with ChatGPT attempting to get clarity or finding your why just increases frustration. When you don't start the task, your brain keeps simulating effort, risk, evaluation, and that mental simulation increases stress. But the moment you shift into goal-directed actions, even the smallest ones, something changes in your brain. You move from rumination to active engagement and from overthinking into action. And that by itself already reduces emotional friction. So when Alex says just start, he's pointing to something real. Because you see, action isn't the reward, it's the regulating mechanism. He also talks about...
I obviously am somebody who always wants to optimize how much work I do per unit of time. And so I was, there was definitely times earlier in my life I was really romanticized by these like very extensive morning routines and supplement rituals and like all this stuff of mental masturbation around the work that needed to be done.
And who of us hasn't? Open your social media and morning routines start with getting up at 5 a.m., taking a cold shower, exercising, journaling, having the perfect macro-balanced breakfast with homemade sourdough bread, meditation, yoga, and all in the most beautiful setting. And that is unreal for most of us. So Alex's line matters because, you see, productivity culture has turned preparation into a performance. Instagram, beautiful, of course. Morning routines are just the beginning. There are supplement stacks and systems and optimization here and productivity hack here. And if you're ambitious, that world is very attractive and seductive because planning feels productive, optimizing intelligent, but it often delays starting. And for a lot of smart people, productivity advice has become a socially acceptable way of procrastinating, not because you're lazy. Planning reduces anxiety and starting reduces stress, and those are not the same thing. So let's talk about what's actually happening here. You know what you need to do, say create the presentation, go to the gym, or have that difficult conversation with a colleague. Now, the problem isn't confusion or ambiguity, it is how this thing makes you feel. When you think about that task, it triggers discomfort. And then, of course, there's so many other competing things that call for your attention. Notifications, emails, meetings, competing goals. So that's not laziness, that is cognitive overload. Your brain starts running simulations on all at once. How long will it take? What if I mess up? What if I'm not good enough or it is not good enough? And how much energy and time is this going to cost me? And that simulation uses working memory, and working memory is limited. And when that gets overloaded, stress increases even more. Now here's what Fuchsia Sirois' work and research becomes important. She describes procrastination as an emotion regulation strategy. You feel stressed, you avoid the task. Stress drops temporarily, And that relief reinforces the avoidance. But the task, of course, doesn't disappear, so later the stress comes back and even stronger. Now you have a loop: stress, avoidance, short-term relief, more stress. And then that loop that can run on for days and sometimes years. So when you say, I just need more discipline, what you're actually doing is blaming yourself for a stress cycle. And the problem isn't effort, it's cognitive overload. And often it's not just the task, it's the environment around the task, the environment we live in, the ambiguity, notifications, admin tasks, other clutter, frictions, the modern work life, cues that constantly trigger that stress response before we even begin. And if you're noticing that certain types of work almost always activate this loop, it's not random. That's exactly why I built something called the Decision Environment Assessment. And it's a free tool, and it helps you map where stress and friction are getting triggered in your workday before you even try to start. And you can download it here. It's completely free. The link is below in the description. And it only takes a few minutes, and I think it is such a useful little tool, because it gives you clarity on what's actually driving the avoidance. Now let's talk about how to lower activation energy directly. So just start stops feeling like a fight.
Because the thing is, when you start working, you start getting in the mood to work, right? Like everything else is procrastinating around the work that you think you should do.
That's such a powerful line, because most people think the opposite. They think, I need to feel ready, or I'm waiting to feel motivated, or I need clarity, my why, to be automatically in the mood to do the work. You know, I have a thing with the why. But remember what we just discussed. Engaging in goal-directed action changes our emotional state. Action regulates mood, and not the other way around. When you sit and you start thinking about the task, your brain keeps running simulations, and that increases stress. But the moment you start, even with the smallest of related actions, you shift from rumination to engagement, and from overthinking to doing the work, to actually interacting with it. And that shift changes state. So when Alex says the mood follows the work, he's not being motivational. He's describing a regulatory brain-based mechanism. But here's the friction point. If the first step feels too big, you never get to the part where the mood actually can shift. And that's where most of us get stuck or stall. So the real question isn't, how do I get in the mood? The real question is, how do I lower the barrier, the threshold enough so I get myself to begin? And that's where activation energy comes in. So here is how you make just start work for you. The principle is used in cognitive behavioral therapy. It's called behavioral activation. The idea is simple. You reduce the needed activation energy by shrinking the task until the first step feels almost trivial. So it's not create this strategic presentation that's abstract and difficult. Instead, open laptop. And if that feels too much, make it walk to the desk, sit down, open the laptop, open PowerPoint, create a blank slide. Concrete physical actions reduce ambiguity and cognitive load and uncertainty. And when uncertainty drops, stress drops, initiation becomes easier, and you're not relying on motivation. You are reducing friction. And once you begin, momentum usually carries you forward. And that's what operationalizing it actually means. It's not motivational, it's neurological. Alex is right. Starting matters. There are no shortcuts around doing the work. But if starting feels disproportionately hard, it's not because you lack discipline, it's because the task is too abstract and your nervous system is reacting to uncertainty. So stop trying to overpower that, design around it, shrink the task, lower the activation energy, start small enough that beginning doesn't require a heroic act of willpower, because once you understand what your brain is resisting, execution becomes so much simpler. And if you want more deep dives like this, where we take practical advice and look at the actual science behind it, please subscribe. Ambitious people, we don't need more hype. We need clarity.